welcome to Note Doctors. My name is Paul.
My name is Jenn.
My name is Ben.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In this podcast, we will be talking about all things theory with some of the best music theory teachers in the country. If you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Note Doctors. Thank you so much for tuning in on this episode where we are talking about voice students and what they need in music theory and aural skills education. Before we get to our conversation, I do want to mention that we are planning a mailbag episode where we answer your messages, your emails. So if you have questions, comments for us, you can always reach us at Facebook. We have an Instagram account for Note Doctors Podcast, I think that's what it's called, or our email, which is notedoctorspodcast@gmail.com. So you can send us questions, comments, and we'll get back to you on a special episode later this spring. For our episode today, we have a delight. I think Jennifer Youngs constitutes as a delight. I think she's just a delight.
Totally.
Jennifer Youngs, who is a vocal professor and good friend of ours, and she comes and sits and chats with us about what vocal performance students need in music theory. So Ben, tell us a little bit more about Dr. Youngs.
Sure, Paul. In the fall of 2020, Dr. Youngs joined the faculty of Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, where she teaches private voice, vocal pedagogy, and diction. Previously, Jennifer was an assistant professor and coordinator of vocal studies at Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas. She earned a Doctor of Musical Arts degree in Performance and Pedagogy, as well as a Master of Music degree in Performance and Opera from the University of North Texas, and a Bachelor of Music degree in Performance from the Conservatory of Music at the University of the Pacific. Her most recent appearance was as Armida in Handel's Rinaldo with the American Baroque Opera Company, and it was hailed as a standout from the Dallas Morning News.
I ask students to do that all the time. If they have another instrument that they are proficient at, I ask them to do fingerings. I ask them, and they will sight read it perfectly because there's a physicality that is connected to intervals. There's a physicality, and I think even their ear, because they've been playing that instrument so long. I think that's one of the reasons maybe too, kind of why singers go to hand signs. It's our physical representation of what's happening. I think that's one of the reasons the Guidonian hand, even going all the way back to the Guidonian hand, is that there was a physicality between, the points of intervals, and we don't have something physically that we can press or slide or, things like that. So I think that this is our physicality that we gravitate to, so we have something similar to fingerings.
So today our very special guest is Jennifer Youngs. We're so excited to have you here, former colleague, former kind of North Texan, right? And
yes.
So we're super excited to talk with you from where you're at now about what kind of, especially like voice performance students really need from their theory and kind of aural skills undergraduate classes. But before we kind of get into that, we always like to ask our guests a little bit about how you found your place, how you found where you are right now, and how you got there. And so tell us a little bit about kind of how you became a professional singer, how you became a professor, and also, at what age do you begin experiencing hearing loss from singing all those high notes?
I know. Where do we start? So I was born and raised outside of Kansas City, Kansas. And then my family moved to the Phoenix area, and that's where I went to high school. And then my high school choir took a senior trip, and we were supposed to go to the Bay Area, but it also included the Stockton area, which is about an hour and a half east of San Francisco. And I ended up getting a call the night before we left, and my choir director said, "There's going to be an opera specialist there that wants to do a master class. Will you sing for him?" And I said, sure, yeah, I'll sing for him. So I ended up singing for this man, and he recruited me heavily. And so I ended up randomly getting recruited by the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. And that's where I ended up going to school for my undergrad, and did a lot of singing and just had a really, really great experience there. And then my husband and I met while I was in my undergrad, and we got married. And then after I finished my undergrad, I thought we would put him back into school, and that kind of took us all over the country. So I stepped away from music for a little bit after my undergrad, and was a stay-at-home mom for the majority of my 20s. And then when we got the opportunity to move down to North Texas, that was the first place that we lived where I felt that the teachers and the instruction were going to be strong enough. So I auditioned for the University of North Texas, and that's where I ended up getting both my master's and my DMA there. And then in that meantime, I started working for Texas Women's University, where I ended up as the coordinator for vocal studies. And then from there, I took a job at Brigham Young University. So that's where I'm at now. I'm here in Utah, teaching private voice and diction and pedagogy. So that's what I do. That's like the real short version of how I got here.
That's great. And so what was your own kind of music theory experience when you were in undergrad?
So my music, this is going to be so fun, and it'll probably wrap me out so bad. But I really had wonderful music theory teachers in my undergrad. My first music theory teacher was a jazzer, and he was a jazz pianist, which probably made it more difficult. I remember him building chords at the piano, and they were complex jazz chords, and he had a very monotone voice, and he would just play this really crazy complex chord and then just say, "Can't you hear the fa?" I'm like, no, I can't hear the fa. So it was just, I just remember struggling, so badly. But I will kind of going back, I have to give a lot of credit to my high school choral directors. Because to get us started in music theory, we did 3 lines of sight singing every day. And then on Fridays, we had dictation. And so even starting in high school, we were getting, just really basic part writing. I think by the time we were seniors, we were doing 2-part part writing. But I cannot tell you how much that helped the transition for me going from high school into college. And so that helped. And quite a bit. And then I also had in my undergrad, one of the composition professors was another one of my theory professors, and he was French Canadian, and always would say, "You must ear with your hears." So he always had such great things to say. But between that and aural skills, our choral director taught aural skills, and so part of our sight singing, we were solfeging the Bach 2-part inventions. And so we were singing through those and things like that. And he also was a huge follower of Kodai. So we were doing all of the Kodai and then the 2-part inventions and things like that. I think it really established such a great basis for me as far as when it came to theory. Now, I'll confess I was not a great theory student, but I do recognize, especially now, I do recognize what a great foundation that I had, both coming from a wonderful choral program in high school and then through my undergrad. It really set me up for wonderful things later. So,
yeah, I've heard that with a lot of my students. The background you have in high school can set you up one way or the other, for better or for worse.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And coming, in Arizona, there was such a wonderful history and such a wonderful program there that they really were doing great things to help us set that up, for sure.
One fantastic thing I find myself saying to my students a lot of the time is, people that come in, they don't have necessarily any preparation from high school. They think they're somehow worse at music theory. And I kind of have to sit them down and say, listen, you're not bad at music theory. You just don't have as much knowledge coming in. You don't have prerequisite knowledge that other people have. That doesn't make you more or less, equipped. I mean, that makes you super talented, super able to absorb everything that we're talking about from a blank slate. You don't have any bad habits, which is good, but don't feel like you can't do it because you don't have the background that other people have.
I love that.
That's something to overcome for a lot of students coming in. I don't know if you all have experienced the same thing, but I've definitely experienced that. People think that they can't do it because they just don't have some prerequisite knowledge that other students have. And I think that's such a fallacy.
That's so wonderful. And especially having been at several institutions, I've seen the entire gamut, with that. And being at Texas Women's, we had such a variety of backgrounds, from really well-prepared students to students that, just like you said, Ben, that they just don't have the previous knowledge. But you're right. No, I think that's a really great approach to take to it.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I'm a singer too, and so I came to college, as a young singer, but I also have always been an instrumentalist. So I started on piano at a really young age, and I started on horn at like 8 or 9 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And so I don't think that I'm maybe the average vocal student coming into college, because I had a lot of theory training. And, I had played in youth orchestra and things like that, had to transpose. So I know a lot of my singer students sometimes feel very comfortable in aural skills and very uncomfortable in written theory.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us a little bit about like the average vocal student? Who are they? What are they looking for? What makes that a challenge for them, the written theory class versus aural skills class, those kinds of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, just like you said, Jennifer, the idea that you had experience in multiple different instruments just puts you so far ahead. I can't even imagine what a leg up that would be, But if you have an average vocalist, oftentimes. This is one of my soapboxes of many, but one of the things I think that happens if you come from an instrumental background versus a vocal, I wish we could just put a whole blanket of we're all instrumentalists, but there does seem to be this divide between instrumentalists and vocalists. If you think about it, I tell my pedagogy students this all the time. Oftentimes as singers, we come to our instrument in such a different way than instrumentalists. When my son started on the trumpet, I remember him coming home and he only could make sounds for about 2 weeks on his mouthpiece. That was it. That was all he could do. That was all he was allowed to do, was make noise on his mouthpiece. And then they had to go through the parts of the instrument, and they had to go through, there was just, I think back to beginning piano too. We think about the parts that make up the instrument. We think about posture. We think about all these things. Because our voices are organic and we have them from birth, I think that we come about it from such a different way. We're already, probably by the time they join a choir or even come into some kind of structured musical experience, they've already experimented with their own voice, maybe to a high degree, to a high level. And so sometimes that voice can function really, really well. That was my case. My parents, to their credit, had me play cello before they put me in choir. They said, we always knew that you could sing, and whenever you started to do that, they would be fine. So I played cello poorly until about halfway through high school. And I remember when I went to go audition for choir, I couldn't read treble clef.
Wow.
So I would do all of the sight singing from the bass clef.
That is such an anomaly. I don't think
Is that funny?
You're
Not
not a
an
soprano who
average
can't read
singer
treble clef.
Yeah.
A soprano that couldn't read treble clef for years. Yeah, for years. So, but one of the things that ended up happening was my ear and my ability to parrot or to imitate was really high. It was really, really good because I didn't have these basic skills to fill it in. So I think that oftentimes singers, they can walk even into a higher, into college, into a higher institution of learning, and still function at a really high level with their instrument, maybe not with these skills underneath. And I think that oftentimes singers come to this being able to almost mask or hide that they don't have those skills yet. And I think that that's where that ends up happening. I also think the other part of this question, I also think that in the classroom, when students are in choir or early choirs, to be able to teach those skills and still have a deadline of I have to put on a choir, I have to put on a show, I have to be able to do these types of things, then I think oftentimes choral directors will take the easy route and just play the line for them rather than helping them learn how to figure out the line themselves. And so I think that there's some corners that are cut as far as teaching them how to be musicians rather than just to parrot. But I bet you, do you guys ever do singbacks where you play, 5 or 6 pitches? I bet those singers are nailing those.
Oh, yeah, without even thinking. They're like, do, me,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So our ears are sharp. Our ears and our ability to be able to regurgitate or sing back or any of those things. But I think to a discredit to the student in high school, you have this two-edged sword where people have to put on a choral concert. They have these deadlines that they have to make, and so oftentimes they know that they can expedite the learning of a piece if they send tracks or if they if they just play the line instead of figuring it out. So I talk a lot, I speak a lot to my music educators that are in my pedagogy class about letting the students struggle. Let them struggle a little bit longer and see if they can figure it out before you play it for them.
Yeah, we just this morning, I taught theory ped this morning, and I was saying that one of our goals as teachers is our students' independence from us.
I love that.
By the time that they leave you, they should have some ability to self-assess and self-correct and things like that.
Yes.
And that if you always are the one, that we have to teach them that skill as well, essentially. And I was like, that's why long ago in the aural skills class, I stopped modeling.
Yes.
I never model. I don't sight sing with them. I barely sing at all when I'm teaching aural skills, because if they will just do what I do, right?
It's a crutch. It's a huge crutch. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I try, if we're doing some sort of singing exercise, to just give the original pitch, and that is it, on the piano or with my voice. And then after that, everything they have to get from okay, well, if you can't find that note, let's go back to do. Where's so? Helping them navigate those things. Because that's how you become autonomous, in learning music.
I agree with that. Yeah, my undergrad, the choral director that taught aural skills, we had to do everything from a tuning fork. So all the freshmen had tuning forks around their neck. And you could tell all the freshmen and sophomores, that we're still in aural skills because we literally had a tuning fork on our person all the time. So we never touched the piano. We had to get all of our starting pitches from the A, and figure out where we were going to start. I forgot about that. I think I forgot about that until I showed my pedagogy class all the ridiculous ways you can hear a tuning fork. Did you ever try you put it on your head, or you can?
Oh no!
You haven't tried this?
No.
Oh my goodness! I will send them to you. So you can. This is what happens when you only teach aural skills with a tuning fork. all the freshmen figure out, okay, so I'll run down the funny ones really quick. So you can obviously hit the tuning fork, and you can put the ball of the tuning fork between your teeth, and it will radiate in your head, so you can hear it in your head.
Oh my
and
gosh.
then you can put it on the top of your skull too. You can hear the note on the top of your skull. But then you also can stick your finger in your ear and put the ball of the tuning fork on the end of your elbow, and you can hear it through your
Well, now I want to get a tuning fork and try all of
I get a tuning fork. I don't even have one. I don't even own one.
No, I don't think I do anymore either.
The really good ones, oh my gosh. This is what happens when freshmen have too much time on their hands. But the really good one is you can do your finger in your ear, touch your elbow to your kneecap, and then put the tuning fork on your ankle bone. And you can hear
What an incredible piece of technology this is.
Your body becomes the amplifier, right?
Yes.
Like this giant resonator.
Yes, I'm telling you, we had them on shoestrings around our neck.
That's awesome. I love that.
That was
great.
great. It was great. Yeah.
I might try that, because I was actually just the other day talking to one of my colleagues about maybe we need to have all of our aural skills students learn bass guitar so they can hear the bass lines. But having everyone have a bass guitar is a little expensive. But maybe
just a
tuning
tad.
fork could be good.
Well, and just working out how much of interval recognition, if you've got an A, but you have to start on an F, or, things like that. And then to audiate the entire, not only switch to F, but then you have to, audiate F major, things like that. So it really did a lot as far as that process and being able to recognize those intervals, which come in handy. So.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so we've talked quite a bit about aural skills, but what about music theory? What types of kind of concepts, are most applicable for our voice or vocal performance majors? And maybe you can throw in some that are least applicable too.
Oh gosh, I don't want to.
We love hot takes.
We love the least. We do.
Least favorite. What is really funny is that so many of these things, you just have time to reflect on them as you stay in music longer. And I tell my students all the time, even though I have an opportunity to sing opera, the stuff that I get the most hired to do is early music and new music. And thinking about early music, I can't tell you how much theory helps me in ornamentation. And thinking about how to construct, or thinking of different ways to go about ornamentation and things like that. So it helps in the creativity when I have to be more improvisatory. Mm-hmm. So that definitely helps. And then in new music, I'm telling you, going back to those tone rows and being able to sing back things and things like that. But I think it helps so much. Paul, you kind of mentioned as far as tuning to the bass. That is so absolutely instrumental, and being able to listen and tune to the bass and being able to pick that out. That's even now, working on that Lord Nelson Mass. If I'm able to play the bass line and then sing the coloratura over it, that just helps so much. But for me, as far as recognizing really good voice leading and ways that I can be more artful, that's one of the biggest ways that I've been able to use theory. I'm not a great person at, really thinking about chord construction or anything like that, unless I am doing new music and I have to find random pitches, then I can really zone in on that. Like, well, I am singing the third, or I'm singing the fourth, or how I'm pulling, oftentimes in new music, you have to pull pitches out of the air. And so being able to kind of recognize where things are going or how they're constructed just shortens the amount of time it takes to learn pieces, which also makes you marketable. So
That's true. That's very true.
That's great.
The thing is that what you just said means we have to keep it all, because you basically just said that we need to teach them counterpoint and voice leading and like 12 tone set theory. So
Well, this has been another one of my soapboxes this year, is that sometimes in programs that are really concentrated in opera, sometimes they live their entire life and all their repertoire is in the long 19th century. And it's interesting to tell students that if you want to make a living, if you want to pay your rent by doing this, you have to make yourself marketable. That means be comfortable with any kind of style, any kind of thing that's asked of you, especially early on in your career. So yes, as much as I sometimes loathed sitting in those classes, and because I wasn't great at it, I didn't feel like I was really great at it, but I recognize now that it gave me the foundation to be marketable.
Yeah, a lot of the things that I've experienced just playing, I mean, I play a lot of gigs on the trumpet in addition to doing theory, and a lot of the things you mentioned I've done in the last year on gigs. Like we did this thing in the summer, This Land Is Your Land, for 4th of July, and the director says, okay, on the second and the third time through, everyone just go crazy, just add in whatever you'd like to do on top, and I'll keep going on the melody. And then he said, let's give it a whirl. And then I was the only one that was adding anything. The entire rest of the orchestra just played their part again. And I thought, well, where were all the embellishments? And I'm looking around, and they're like, well, it's going to take us a little while. I'm going to write this out. And I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, she should be able to just improvise this, But it
At
comes
least
up on
something.
the job.
Oh, yes.
Quite a bit. Just add some
Yes.
basic embellishments to something, whether it's early music or something that's pretty... standard tonal, I guess. Even that could be something simplistic.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I relate to that. Yeah, it's funny because my jazz colleagues, they said we should give serialism the axe. But maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't give it the axe quite yet.
a few people have said that, actually.
Yeah.
They're not the only ones. There's a
Serialism's
lot of
taken a lot
grudges out
flack
there.
lately.
Yeah. Not a lot of fans.
Not a lot of it. I love it.
So to come to kind of one of my pet peeves with singers, I'm going to just admit it, I'm going to own it right now, something I'm working through, is that they don't pay attention to rhythm. Why is that? You already mentioned kind of the issue of like learning music by rote, but why is that an area of consistent consternation for so many singers? Is this struggle with just what the tempo is, or what measure we're in, or what the rhythm is, and how to do that? So what's up with that? Help me out.
Oh my goodness. If I miss anything in a rehearsal, I literally just say, I'm a soprano, I don't count. Like, I use the same thing. And I'll say things like, we just feel it. We just feel it. Yes.
Theorists don't feel, Jen.
I
Theorists
know. You callous, unfeeling theorist. No, you know what would be so funny too? I think it would be really fascinating to see which of the voice parts would be the most egregious. But with this too, I have a suspicion of which voice part would be the most egregious. But I think it's one of those things, kind of starting off with those basic principles that might be fed to them instead of them learning how to pull it apart and be able to figure out rhythm on their own. I can't tell you. I know that it's a problem. I know it's a serious problem, but I can't really tell you where it stems from, other than maybe we just are not required to do it as early. But I will say, the quickest, the fastest method to remedy that is singing new works, where they don't have a recording to go against, or they don't have something that they can parrot at all. Mm-hmm. Man, that has taught me more about how to be a precise musician. Mm-hmm. And to go after that is going after new music where it's required of you. Yeah. I wonder if singers just, and until it's required, until it puts them on the line. They don't consider it to be important or of a priority. So until I always tease my students, until there's a threat of public humiliation, that we may not get that under control. But when I started doing it wasn't until I started my master's that I really was doing new music, and man, that it requires you to be honest. It requires you to be honest in how you learn it and how you perform it. And then also when you have a living composer that's sitting right there, I mean, I can fudge on Mozart and he won't come after me. At least I don't think so. But I feel a tremendous pressure when I have living composers that I'm working with, because I want to be respectful and I want to be honest with them, especially when they're sitting right there. So learning new music, I'm wondering if you could incorporate some of that into your works or whatnot. Maybe if the students even come up with a melodic line and they have to, give it to a friend and they have to learn it or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
But I recognize that, rhythm is definitely an issue and it's definitely a problem. But I think it kind of goes back to that idea that for so long it's just been handed to them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's not right. Let's fix it. It goes like this, and so I think.
Yeah. I also wonder about when I have students, audiate, or you can look at your at a sight melody, and the choir kids instantly start doing this.
Yeah,
they're doing hand signs, right?
Yes,
and they'll do it in a steady tempo, right? Even though it could be in 6/8, and the notes are not happening in rhythm, right? And so, how does it's like when a voice student looks at the page, it's almost like the rhythm is not foundational. It's the solfege, right? That's like at the heart of it, right?
I would agree.
Issue?
I would agree.
Yeah.
I think that we just revert to what feels the best, and we can sing, and so I think that we go to that. I recognized a long time ago that rhythm was my downfall, and it was my weakest link, and so when I'm pulling a new piece apart, I actually fix rhythm first. But it takes a while for students to recognize what their strengths and what their weaknesses are without just reverting to what they're good at. And so I think that's a comfort level, and especially if they're in class and they have to do it quick, of course they're going to go to they're going to go straight to what they know and what they believe. And so but that took me a long time. Yeah, Jennifer.
Well, like, true confession. When I audiate arrhythmically for the most part.
Arrhythmically, really?
Yeah. Yeah, if I'm sight singing something, and now this is where I don't know if it's that singing rhythms are just easier as well. So I think that's a component of this, that like as a French horn student, by high school, we were playing insane rhythms.
Oh, yes.
And, have things that are heavily syncopated, or where you had to infer like swing or, things like that. And so, all of those things were kind of built in. And choir music, vocal music, even solo vocal music, is often just not as rhythmically complex. It is not as consistently rhythmically complex, is what I would say.
I would agree with
instrumental
that.
Music. And so vocalists just have less exposure and experience, I think, sometimes with heavily syncopated rhythms or changing meters or things like that. So I don't know if it's a product of, like, rhythm has always felt easy for me. And so if it's a product of, like, I got to make sure I'm getting all these intervals right, or I'm getting all these notes correct, and the rhythm's going to be fine. Like, I don't have to worry about that. Because when you said that, I was like, I mean, I do this for a living. Like, I teach sight singing for a living, and I don't typically do a steady, like, I'm getting.
You're not audiating in tempo, right?
Well, or if I am incorporating the rhythm, I'm not really doing it in a tempo because I'm going to stop and fix in my head the spots that are hard, right? And I'm doing that with pitches. So if I'm audiating something and I realize like, oh, I audiated the wrong note, I'm going to stop and fix that. So I'm not going to be like practicing it in rhythm. Maybe there's something innate there. I don't know.
Totally. I'll make a confession as well. It's Confessions Day. I will say I cannot audiate arrhythmically. Like, I will always audiate in time. But I will always audiate with fingerings, with trumpet fingerings.
Oh, yes.
If you take away my hands, I become way less good at sight singing. And I've told my students this in class, that if you watch me sing something in class and you look down at the side of my pants, I will be doing the trumpet fingerings of the tune that we're singing all the time. So
I ask students to do that all the time. If they have another instrument that they are proficient at, I ask them to do fingerings. I ask them, and I've had trombone players and things like that, and they will sight read it perfectly because there's a physicality that is connected to intervals. There's a physicality, and I think even their ear, because they've been playing that instrument so long. I think that's one of the reasons, maybe too, kind of going back to Paul's comment, why singers go to hand signs. It's our physical representation of what's happening. I think that's one of the reasons the Guidonian hand, even going all the way back to the Guidonian hand, is that there was a physicality between, the points of intervals, and we don't have something physically that we can press or slide or things like that. So I think that this is our physicality that we gravitate to. So we have something similar to fingerings, but I've seen that happen time and time again. Pianists, trumpet players, flute players, if they're having a hard time sight reading, or even if they're in lessons and they're struggling with the intervals of a measure or something, I'll just say, can you use your fingerings and try it again? Usually it's fixed on the first go round if they use fingerings. So
yeah, it definitely circles back, as you say, to kind of the original point, which is like, well, what then are the vocalists doing to audiate, or how do we actually take this printed thing and internalize that? There's so many different thought processes going on within like one given aural skills class. It's almost hard to like individualize that process, because even within trumpets or even within choir, even within orchestra, they're all doing different things to actually internalize that melody. So that's a challenge. Like, that's a challenge of teaching ear training and sight reading. That comes up every semester. It's just it's always there.
Yes, all the time. Well, and I think also, pulling those layers back, just like we've been talking about how we go about things, I think so students can see that there are multiple different ways that you can go about learning a piece and internalizing a piece. I think pulling back the curtain and showing students that there's more than one way to do this, and all of them can be effective. It's just what is your pattern, what is going to be your quickest way to artistry, what is your quickest way to getting to that ending product. But they can look really different. All of them can look so different, and that's okay. That's totally fine. I've been really intrigued to see that some students will guard how they practice. They don't want to expose how they practice, and I'm very much like, I don't care how you get it done, as long as it gets done. So getting the work, there's no shame in how the work gets done, as long as it's getting done. So.
Right. And that they're practicing in a way that is helping them, rather than hurting them or building bad habits or not preparing them for the assessment or getting into the outcome, because that can be another problem. Yeah. No. Well, I feel a little bit better, but about rhythm and singers. But it's something. It's a challenge. But I think you're absolutely right with the solfege and the
the physicality
of it, right?
Yeah. I'm sitting here thinking now, if I was holding my horn and I was audiating, I would never do it without rhythm.
Yes.
Never.
Right. Yeah, because you have to press
But when I'm
keys,
looking
right?
to sight sing something, what I do, it's not arrhythmic. That's not really the right word, but I'll so let's say it's like a dotted rhythm. I'm keeping like short, long relationships as I'm going, but I'm speeding up parts that are easy and slowing down parts where I have to, I'm doing all of that kind of. So
Yes.
It's not really arrhythmic, but the rhythm is like secondary in a sense to getting those other relationships in place, I think. But on horn, I would never do that. I would never, ever do that. So I don't know. There must be something about either how we're trained as singers versus instrumentalists or what the music is like. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would never not audiate the rhythm if I was sitting here with my horn. That would be a whole different thing.
Do you think it has something to do with, obviously instrumentalists have conductors and they're of a band orchestra, but is the role of the choir director in expressing the rhythm more powerful or stronger to the choir than an orchestra director is to an orchestra? I don't know.
That's a good question. I think it would depend on the conductor themselves, right? Because I've had conductors that I've been in front of that I think more than an actual beat, they're doing interpretive dance. And so
Yes.
I think there's an ictus in there. But I've also had other conductors that are extremely rhythmic and, partly to try to keep a whole ship going, especially in opera. If you really think that even your singer and the pit are split, visually even, and to keep that whole ship in line, those oftentimes can tend to be very, very clear and rhythmic conductors when they definitely have to keep a pit and, and a singer together. And so, I don't know, I think it would have to depend on the importance that the conductor feels about, rhythmic integrity, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Right.
Well, I think there's more independence of line in instrumental music. So, like, it's more likely that the horns are doing something different than the trumpets, who are doing something different than the flutes, than the clarinets. You have a lot more, like, you have to be maybe a little more independent because your conductor cannot possibly give 25 instruments all of their rhythms. Whereas in choir, often, even if like the men are doing something different than the women, that's still only two different kind of ideas happening at once. It's rare. It does happen, but it's rare that like all 4 parts or 8 parts are doing totally different things.
That's
So
a
maybe
good
it's
point.
that.
Yeah, all the
very good
homophony, right, in the choral kind of setting. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
that's a really good point. When I was in music ed at Towson, I designed a rhythm lesson based on the beginning of a Brian Balmage's tune. And I had picked 6 football players where the rhythms would articulate the names of the football players. So it was only the first 8 bars of the tune, but there were 6 different rhythmic patterns that had to be articulated by different sections of the ensemble. And I don't know, I don't have, honestly, a ton of experience with a lot of choral music. That's probably one of the, failings of music theory in general. But my whole lesson was like about just the rhythmic lines, like making sure that everyone was counting their independent rhythmic line, that
I was going to
cell.
say, if you gave them 6 independent rhythmic lines, you already lost the singers.
And football players.
And football players to boot.
Exactly. Yeah, this was like me in undergrad, so you can give a flashback there. 2 confessions
on, we have-
today from me.
We have heart palpitations if we have to voice cross, No, that's awesome. What a fun exercise though, to think about that independence. And if you had a role to do, I find that I find more of that autonomy in opera, especially opera finales. You have a lot of your own squawking that you have to do and interjections and things like that. I find that in opera finales a lot, but again, that's super rare, if you're gonna be doing that much independence. I don't know. I also kind of thinking about that idea too is in an orchestral situation, how many times are you counting rests until you have to come in? And just big chunks, just big chunks of silence. I think that hones in your skills as far as like staying focused and staying hooked up. I remember one time there was a horrible entrance that I had to make while I was on stage. And it was such a bad entrance and I was missing it so many times. And so I found out that between my last cutoff and that next tricky entrance, there were 17 counts. And hallelujah, we're not mic'd as opera singers because I was supposed to be in this party and I'm walking around talking to everyone, going 1, 2, 3, 4. And I found out that I had 17 counts in between. So I literally on stage would kind of turn upstage and talk to everybody, but be counting like audibly.
Brilliant.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I love that.
That's great.
Oh, it was so funny. And then everyone just kind of looks at you. I was like, don't mess me up.
They all start counting at different rates.
Oh,
no! You're off. Oh, that's great. Well, that's a great segue to our next question, because you mentioned opera and opera finales that have all these kind of wonderful contrapuntal, lines, things like that. That is one of the areas that I think it's getting a little bit better in some of our contemporary theory books, but some definitely, thinking back to my own theory education, I don't think we ever looked at vocal music. Certainly we never looked at an aria. Maybe we looked at, maybe a Schubert or a Schumann art song. That was basically it. So it was mostly, piano music, maybe string quartets and things like that, but a lot of instrumental music. So one of our kind of interests, I think, as a group is to try to expand, the musical examples that we're exposing our students to. And so what types of musical compositions would you encourage theory teachers to incorporate into or more into their theory curriculum?
And you really, it's been a hot second since I've looked at these textbooks, but you really don't have much beyond one leader, like one Schubert song or a Schumann song?
I would say art song is like the only type of vocal music the students are generally exposed to.
Or
maybe
music?
Popular. Not a whole lot.
There is actually Cherubino, her aria in Marriage of Figaro is in the Clendeni Marvin for but that's in a section on actually vocal music, but that's a new chapter. And
Is it really?
Most theory books don't even have a chapter on vocal music.
Well, or they'll have Bach chorales, but with the text removed. It's not
right. Yeah.
It doesn't look like vocal music anymore. Which is a real shame because the text is valuable.
It's a shame.
You don't want them singing in German? Like, give that a whirl?
We didn't write the books.
We didn't write the books. Do you know what's so interesting, Paul? You do such a great job in incorporating songs that they hear on the radio. I remember hearing students that they said so many Katy Perry songs were ruined because of your class and things like that,
Yes.
But I think that students don't realize how much popular opera tunes have infiltrated into our, everyday use. How many commercials or how many, scenes in other movies will use the Lock My Flower duet? That one's used a ton. I even remember the habanera from Carmen is even used in the movie Up as he's coming down, as he's coming down the stairs and things like that. I think that so many of these kind of greatest hits, you could do both choral or kind of opera choruses too. The Anvil chorus was such a popular one and definitely gets used in lots of our contemporary movies and commercials and things like that. I think if they had some of those kind of greatest hits in the theory books, I also kind of think what a wonderful purpose it would serve as if they want to continue their work in a master's and a doctoral program. I think sometimes we get really pigeonholed and kind of have blinders on to our own repertoire. And we forget that there's other, that there's other things out there. But I think the biggest thing would be to start with some of those kind of greatest hits that they would recognize anyway. And so there would be this familiarity with it and things like that. I think too, even in opera, you could speak so much to rhythm as they were thinking about exoticism and things like that, where they were trying to pull in rhythms, whether it's Turkish rhythms in Mozart operas, or if it's something that was supposed to portray another nationality. Those vehicles were used as instantaneous recognition of the character on stage. And so you could easily, talk about differentiation. Even in Carmen itself, that kind of bolero rhythm that is used, it lends itself to how exotic Carmen was, and that attraction because she was mysterious and from a different type of people. So I think that there's lots of ways that if you did a little research as far as the background and the use of the music in opera, even down to the language, this would probably be out of the purview for you guys, but there's even times when we use particular dialects to portray socioeconomic status on stage or things like that. But going back to those ideas with music theory, I think the use of rhythm. I also really appreciated one of my colleagues at one point said that he was a musicologist, but he said that he loved using opera because other than pianists, it would incorporate everyone in the room. Singers, instrumentalists, and conductors, if they're going into conducting, it literally would unify everybody in the room. So whether you pulled in a full score, make those singers look at the horn line and can you transpose this? This is what they have to do, things like that. But I think there's lots to be said and lots of uses that you could use for opera. Or maybe giving really simple exercises of ornamentation and how they can use their voice leading, and maybe some rules about that and things like that. But I think that there definitely could be a lot of ways that operatic music could be used as a vehicle to further enhance their theoretical skills.
Yeah, I love that because it's about showing them that, hey, the music that you're listening to or performing is actually applicable, because it's basically about representation, and we've talked
Absolutely.
about that about pop music, right? But
Absolutely.
with opera as well, like if they're not seeing those arias or any of that music in their theory class, well, I'm not going to bring my theory knowledge into this because it clearly doesn't apply because I've never looked at it. But
I agree.
It does. And so that invites them to think, hey, I can bring my theory and my aural skills into this because we looked at that Mozart opera, or we looked at that Verdi aria or whatever. And also the text painting is really cool because then you can connect the cool chords that they're using with those different words. And I think that's a really wonderful connection too there.
Well, I'm still learning these things. You guys probably know the Schubert Gretchen am Spinnrad. It's kind of that quintessential song that started the whole German lieder tradition. That's in a big air quotes, but I just learned this week. I was watching. This is so random. I was watching a video on spinning yarn, actually from the spinner's wheel and things like that. And the person that was doing this little instructional video about spinning on the spinning wheel actually said that young girls, sometimes as young as 7, 8, 9, would start learning how to spin on a spinning wheel, but they would sing songs in order for the spinning wheel to maintain the right amount of speed so the yarn would stay consistent. And that made me think of Gretchen when she stops, sein Kuss, and she sings that big old thing, and then the piano has to start up again. But the idea of that the pianist has to maintain they have to maintain this steady rhythm in order for the yarn to be consistent. I thought that was so nerdy. But I mean, even things as far as like talking about text painting and talking about this idea, I'm still learning things about how we can make art song more consistent and more, more believable. But I thought that was such a wonderful tidbit as far as historically, these young girls would sing songs at the spinning wheel together in order to make sure that the spinning wheel stayed at the right tempo to make the yarn consistent as they were they were spinning it. I thought that was so cool.
I love that. Yeah. It's just making those connections to those older pieces that, like, hey, these are by real humans. These are that there's these real kind of contexts that these songs come from.
Oh,
and
yeah.
These histories, right?
Or
And,
even playing, if you've ever played a clip of an actual hurdy-gurdy and then, and then studied Delayaman and how he portrays that haunting connection between a real instrument and what's that supposed to portray. Or I was just talking to a student about what happens in the right hand of Barber's A Monk and His Cat from
Hermit songs.
Hermit songs. When it has it has like in the right hand, that's supposed to be the cat stepping on the keys. So it's supposed to be, and those kind of things of just figuring out how we can bring real life into our music, I think it's super fun. And you can see your students just light up when they make that connection, and you can just see those wonderful connections. It just makes it more personal.
Yeah, that richness that comes across that you don't necessarily get when you analyze a sonata or something like that. That extra narrative that draws them in.
Well, and something that here's our confession again. I remember really. Do you remember having to do those drop the needle tests in music history? And
you're dating yourself right there.
I know. I still have heart palpitations when I think about those. But I remember feeling like I was just having to get through the chant and early polyphony, and especially keyboard music was really hard for me, like early harpsichord keyboard music. For me, that all sounded the same. It was really difficult to think about that. Until I had the opportunity to go, and I was working on my dissertation, and I had the opportunity to go to a concert in Notre Dame in Paris of Notre Dame polyphony. And they did chant, and they did Notre Dame polyphony, and when they were walking in, when the ensemble was walking in, doing these just chant lines, right? They're just these wonderful melodic chant lines. But it wasn't until I was sitting in that space, sitting in that cathedral, that I realized that as the chant went on, the last note that they would extend, the reverb was so long that it actually became the pedal tone of the next line. And you don't hear that unless you're in the space. And I even wrote my my early theory teacher at UNT, who was teaching all of the pre-1650, and I said, I understand. I get it. I apologize that I never can remember church modes, and I can never remember. But it wasn't until I was in that space, and you can hear that these composers are actually writing for that length of reverb. They're writing for that length of, it was absolutely eye-opening. It was eye-opening to me to sit in there and listen to that. That it really did become a pedal tone, that the next line was harmonizing against. It was crazy. It was crazy.
That's great. It's good for students to realize that these musical examples weren't just pulled to make your life miserable, right? Like they weren't created to make 21st century music students like life miserable. There's these reasons why these composers did these things, these performers did these things.
Cool.
And it's great. That's amazing. Well, this has been such a treat, Jennifer, to chat with you, and time's just flown by, and we just love being able to hear what you have to say about how we can better teach our music voice students and things like that. A lot of things to think about. We do like to end with a little rapid fire questions.
Okay.
And so we know you're not a music theorist by trade, so we'll do some softballs.
Don't expose me. Don't expose me.
Oh, you've already been exposed. So at this point,
By my own volition.
so Jen or Ben, do you have a question first?
I have one.
Okay.
All right. So, what is one thing that you learned in a written music theory class that you use when you're teaching your students in private voice?
How to pull apart rhythm. I had a really great professor that really showed us a shorthand, especially for rhythmic dictation, that I still use. I still pull apart my own music, and I show them how to pull apart really complex rhythms. So that's what I would say.
That's great.
Ben?
Mine's minor do or minor law.
Law.
That's a singer's answer.
Yeah.
I know. Just make it easy on us, okay?
That's a good answer. It's still a good answer.
And that's interesting because all of my singers who are not native to the United States say do bass minor or sorry,
do?
the other one. Yeah, fixed do. They're very fixed do if they're outside of the United States. So
Yeah, just another tool. Just a tool in your tool belt, right?
just not numbers, right? No.
I actually
That's
did numbers
another
in
good one, isn't it?
undergrad.
Yeah.
You had numbers in undergrad?
Yeah. 1 3 5 6 5 4 2 7 1.
Oh no.
I know. It got really messy with accidentals, and so
I know. How would
Yeah.
you? I don't know how you cope.
One. Yeah, it didn't work too well. So my question is, as a professional vocalist, what would be your just advice for people who are teaching aural skills or sight singing who are not singers, and maybe some advice on how to use their voice best, or kind of ways of getting over maybe their anxiety because maybe they're a pianist or a trombonist or something like that. Some kind of advice for those folks who might find themselves having to teach sight singing, but they're not singers.
I think be really brave. I think that students are more forgiving than we want to give them credit for. I think be really brave, sing out. I think the way that you sing, whether it's of high caliber or it's passable, the way that you sing will set the precedent for how they will feel about their own singing, because you're not going to be in front of a whole class of singers. And if you can feel confident in being able to sing out, sing strong, and just be okay with what comes out. First of all, that's going to strengthen your musculature as a singer anyway. So that's going to improve your singing anyway. But also, you might be in there with a percussionist that's not asked to sing hardly at all. And if they see someone who feels confident enough, who is having fun, who it's as much as we, singers still do this too, but they're not self-conscious, or at least less self-conscious about their singing, then you're going to help them to open up and give it a try. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage you, sing out, be okay to fail in front of them, and show that you're human and that we all can improve in whatever. I think once we all realize that our talents might be different, mine might be singing, but if you had me play horn, it would be really bad. But that's why we come to school all together. I think that these classes, both theory and aural skills, are unifying in a way that we get to see who has wonderful skill in this and who's struggling, and that we can be in that process all together. So I think that would be my suggestion: is sing out, sing strong. It's fine. It's going to be fine.
That's great. That's great. I love that. I remember my very first intro to aural skills class I taught. I was so nervous just to sing
really?
just like a scale, a major scale. I practiced it, and I mean, like, I sang growing up, and in high school and in college I sang, but like, I'm not a singer. But man, I was so nervous. And then I was like, they're gonna know I'm singing things wrong. This was an introduction to aural skills class. They had no idea what was going on.
None.
They're like struggling to match pitch.
Right.
In that class.
Right. I was like, okay, it's not going to be so bad. It's going to be okay. Getting over that anxiety it can be a challenge sometime.
Oh, I would have never thought of that. Mine would be playing in front of them.
Yeah.
You know, if I had to play the 3 or 4 part dictation, that's what I would be practicing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all have different skills, but this has
That's
been
right.
such a treat. And so as we wrap up, maybe let our listeners know where they can find you, and on the internet, and any kind of projects that you have coming up.
Okay, let's see. Well, I'm coming on the 28th of April to sing the Lord Nelson Mass at Texas Women's University. And then I'm also doing some teaching and some choral work down at Baylor at the beginning of January. I'm trying to think if there's, as far as you can find clips of me on YouTube, Jennifer Youngs with an S, yes, Jennifer Youngs. And if you look up Jennifer Youngs soprano, you'll find clips of me on YouTube. I don't really have a website. I probably should. But yeah, as far as other projects, I have other things coming up. Oh, maybe I can announce this. I am singing Rodalinda with the American Baroque Opera Company there in Dallas at the beginning of February downtown. I think we're at the Wiley. So I will be back in the DFW area there in February singing some good old Handel. And that's kind of what's going on.
There's really get a grip on.
Oh, boy.
Oh, no. So those are some of the projects that are coming up. I've got lots of things that are still in the works, but I can't announce them quite yet. But those are some of the great things that are coming up, and then I'll just be hanging out here at BYU doing my teaching.
So that's our show. Thank you so much for listening to Note Doctors, the Music Theory and Pedagogy podcast. We will be back with more interviews with professors and teachers who will be dropping all sorts of theory knowledge for your education, edification, and enjoyment. So until then, bye-bye.